The clay pot hits the wooden table with a sound like a heartbeat. Dense. Sure. Final. Inside it, food that should have spoiled 3 days ago is still perfect. And your grandmother is already at the next task, moving fast, wasting nothing, spending zero. She did not learn this from a book. She learned it from a woman who learned it from a woman who watched an empire fall and kept cooking anyway. That clay pot is the first trick, and the physics inside it will embarrass your refrigerator. An unglazed clay vessel is microscopically porous. Water molecules seep through the walls and evaporate on the outer surface. Evaporation is an endothermic process. It pulls heat energy away from the pot's interior as it leaves. The result is an interior temperature 8 to 12 degrees Celsius cooler than the surrounding air, maintained passively, continuously, at zero cost. Set it in a shaded corner where cross-ventilation exists, and that cooling effect intensifies. Cooked beans inside that pot on a 30-degree afternoon last 2 full days longer than beans sitting in a modern bowl on your kitchen counter. The rich bought ice chipped from the slopes of Popocatépetl. Grandmothers bought clay and beat them by Tuesday. But here is where the genius starts. The clay pot is only the beginning of the cold chain, and the second trick belongs to the earth itself. A hole dug 2 feet into the ground, lined with flat volcanic stones, covered with a wooden board and a thin layer of packed soil, holds a stable temperature of 14 to 17 degrees Celsius through the hottest summer and coldest winter. The Earth is a thermal mass so enormous that seasonal temperature swings cannot penetrate more than 2 feet of soil. Root vegetables in that underground bodega last 4 to 5 months without a single centavo of electricity. Squash, sweet potatoes, jicama, dried corn, packed in that hole with a layer of dry sand between them to prevent contact rot. They wait patiently for the week you need them. Today, they throw root cellars away and pay 2,000 pesos a month for electricity. In the 16th century, this was pure gold dug with your own hands. Listen to me, mijo. The third trick lives in the ash from last night's fire, and most people sweep it into the street without a second thought. Wood ash dissolved in water creates a potassium hydroxide solution, a strongly alkaline liquid that kills bacteria on contact and raises the pH of whatever it touches to a level where microbial growth becomes nearly impossible. Corn kernels soaked overnight in this ash water, the process called Nixtamalization, do not just last longer. They transform chemically. The alkaline bath breaks the corn's outer hull, releases bound niacin, doubles bioavailable protein, and eliminates mold that would otherwise destroy an entire season's harvest within weeks. The Spanish conquistadors watched this ritual and thought it was superstition. They brought corn back to Europe without the ash. They developed pellagra by the thousands. Your grandmother's grandmother survived on corn for 500 years because of a handful of ash in a clay pot. While that corn soaks, the fourth trick is already working on the opposite side of the kitchen. Salt. Not the expensive iodized salt in a cardboard tube. Coarse sea salt, the rough kind, the kind that costs almost nothing at the market in bulk. Salt preservation works by drawing water out of food through osmosis, reducing the water activity inside the food to a level where bacteria and mold cannot reproduce. A thin layer of coarse salt rubbed into the surface of fresh cheese extends its edible life from 5 days to 3 weeks without refrigeration. Packed tightly around fish in a clay crock, that same salt produces a product that lasts 6 months. The chemistry is simple, the savings are enormous, and the technique requires nothing you do not already have in your kitchen this morning. The fifth trick is smoke, and it smells like survival. When food is exposed to smoke from dried chili stems, corn husks, and aromatic wood over a slow, low fire, phenolic compounds including guaiacol and syringol deposit onto the food's surface. These phenolics are antimicrobial and antioxidant simultaneously. They kill surface bacteria and slow the oxidative process that makes fat go rancid. A smoked piece of meat hung from the kitchen rafters does not need to be refrigerated for a week in cool conditions. A smoked fish lasts 3 times longer than a fresh one. And your ancestors were doing this with the fuel that cost them nothing, the dried byproducts of the harvest they had already processed. Chili smoke in particular adds a secondary antimicrobial layer from capsaicin vapor that plain wood smoke does not replicate at the same intensity. That specific sizzle and curl of a chili stem hitting hot coals, that is the sound of a grandmother extending her food budget by 40%. Forget the expensive tools. The 6th trick is the sun itself, which your ancestors harnessed more efficiently than any modern dehydrator sold on the internet. Slice your excess tomatoes, chilies, nopals, mangoes, and squash thin. Uniform thickness matters because uneven slices dry at uneven rates and the thicker parts stay moist long enough to mold. Lay them on a pitate mat. Raise a second mat above them on sticks to create a covered but ventilated drying chamber. The interior temperature under that raised cover reaches 50 to 60 degrees Celsius, hot enough to kill surface bacteria and yeasts, low enough to preserve volatile aromatic compounds and vitamins that high-heat dehydrators destroy. Within 2 to 3 days, you have food that lasts a year. The tomatoes you cannot eat this week become the concentrated flavor bombs that flavor your salsas in January. 0 cost, 0 electricity. The sun worked for free every single day, and grandmothers knew how to make it clock in. The 7th trick hangs from the rafters alongside the smoked meat, and it is performing double duty every hour it is up there. Braids of garlic, onions, dried chilies, and fresh herbs strung on cord and suspended above the cooking area are not decoration. They are active preservation environments. The heat rising from the cooking fire continuously circulates through the braids, keeping them dry enough to prevent mold while curing their outer layers into a papery protective skin. Simultaneously, the volatile sulfur compounds from garlic and the capsaicin vapor from chilies diffuse into the air of the kitchen at low concentrations. Concentrations that flying insects find deeply discouraging. Your kitchen smells authentically of food and functions as its own pest-free zone without a single can of chemical spray. The braids process themselves using energy you were already spending on cooking. That is what efficiency looks like at its most elegant. While those braids cure, the 8th trick is fermenting quietly in the corner. Pineapple skins, the part you peeled and almost threw into the trash, dropped into a clay pot with water, a cone of Piloncillo, and a cinnamon stick, to begin fermenting within 24 hours from the wild yeast living on the fruit's outer surface. After 48 hours, you have tapach, a probiotic lightly effervescent beverage that the health food markets sell for 80 pesos a bottle. After 72 hours, it continues fermenting into a mildly acidic liquid with natural preservative properties. Use it as a marinade for meat, and the acidity begins to denature surface proteins, creating an inhospitable environment for pathogens and effectively extending the safe eating window of the meat by a full day. Then take the spent pineapple skins from the strained tapach and bury them at the base of your plants. They exit the kitchen as fertilizer. Nothing, not 1 gram, left as waste. The 9th trick is the chili itself used not as a flavor, but as a chemical shield. Dried, but ground chile de arbol mixed into stored dried beans, dried corn, or dried grains creates an environment that grain weevils and pantry beetles find intolerable. Capsaicin irritates the respiratory systems of small insects at concentrations that are undetectable to human taste in the quantity used for storage. A thin layer of ground dried chili at the bottom of your storage crock, another thin layer on top. Your dried goods are protected for months without chemical pesticides. Your ancestors called this common sense. Today, people buy plastic-sealed containers from an import store and still find weevils in their rice because the seal was not perfect. The chili solution costs less than the container and works better than the lid. Listen to me. The 10th trick belongs to the lime, calcium hydroxide, Atacal, and its power to preserve eggs in a way that embarrasses plastic wrap. Eggs submerged completely in a diluted lime water solution are sealed from oxygen and bacteria by the calcium carbonate coating that forms on the shell surface when it reacts with the alkaline water. In this environment, eggs remain edible and safe for 3 to 6 months without any refrigeration whatsoever. Pull one out after 8 weeks. Crack it open. Cook it into a tortilla. You will not know the difference. Before electricity reached the villages, this was how families kept eggs through the dry season when hens stopped laying reliably. A bucket of water, a handful of cal from the market, and your weekly egg surplus becomes a 6-month protein reserve. The cost is almost nothing. The return is enormous. If the 11th trick is the gourd, the tecomate, dried and sealed, hanging in your kitchen as a water vessel. Modern people look at it and see a decorative artifact. Your grandmother looked at it and saw insulation engineering. The wall of a dried gourd has lower thermal conductivity than fired clay and far lower than metal or glass. Water stored in a tecomate, kept in a shaded area, stays measurably cooler than water in any other common container type, and stays cool longer once chilled. The gourd grows on a vine in your yard that asks nothing from you beyond planting. It produces dozens per season, each one becoming a free, lightweight, naturally insulating container. No factory made it. No shipping container brought it. The vine made it while you were sleeping, and it costs you 0 pesos per unit. The 12th trick is the Nopal cactus pad, and it has 3 jobs it performs simultaneously without being asked. Fresh Nopal pads scraped of their spines contain mucilage, a viscous plant sap with mild antimicrobial properties. Wrapping fresh food in a large Nopal pad creates a breathable envelope that keeps moisture in without trapping the anaerobic conditions that cause fast spoilage in airtight packaging. The mucilage on the pad's surface makes that environment slightly hostile to the bacteria trying to enter from the outside. Leave the wrapped food in a cool corner, and it stays fresh measurably longer than unwrapped food left in the same conditions. The cactus pad then dries around the food and becomes a protective shell. Or your ancestors were engineering a microclimate around their food with a plant that grew wild on every rocky hillside in the country and asked nothing in return. But here is something that most people miss, and it is the 13th trick hiding inside the corn husk. Not the dried husk for tamales. The fresh green husk from a just-picked ear of corn is full of chlorophyll and natural plant waxes. Wrap fresh cooked meat or fresh cheese in several layers of green corn husk, and the waxes on the inner surface reduce moisture loss, while the chlorophyll creates mild surface antibacterial conditions. The husk breathes, which prevents the anaerobic decomposition that destroys food in sealed plastic wrap, and simultaneously keeps the food from drying out completely. Or this is modified atmosphere packaging executed with a part of the ingredient you were going to throw away before you even got to the kitchen. The 14th trick is Epazote, that wild herb that grows in disturbed soil, in vacant lots, at the edge of your garden without being invited. A handful of Epazote leaves cooked directly into your pot of beans does not only add flavor, it contains ascaridole, a natural compound with anti-parasitic and mild antimicrobial properties. Beans cooked with Epazote have a longer safe holding time after cooking because the herb's compounds continue to be present in the liquid. The gas-producing oligosaccharides in the beans are also partially broken down by the Epazote's compounds during cooking, making the beans more digestible, meaning your family absorbs more nutrition per portion and requires less food to feel satisfied. More nutrition per peso. A weed. Free. Growing between your patio tiles right now. The 15th trick is Piloncillo replacing white sugar in every preservation context. Piloncillo, unrefined whole cane sugar, dark and dense, retains molasses content that white refined sugar has had stripped from it. That molasses content means Piloncillo absorbs atmospheric moisture more slowly than white sugar, extends its own shelf life in storage, and ferments more reliably in beverages like tepache because the residual minerals feed the fermenting organisms more completely. When you use Piloncillo to make a fruit preserve or a conserve, the resulting product is more stable on the shelf because the mineral-rich sugar base creates an environment less hospitable to competing organisms than a pure white sugar base. It costs less per kilo. It does more per gram. It is one of the clearest examples of how our ancestors chose the less processed option not out of poverty, but out of precision. The 16th trick is the metate, the volcanic stone grinding surface. Do not dismiss this as nostalgia. The rough volcanic stone surface, when grinding soaked corn or dried chilies, generates a specific particle size and surface texture in the resulting paste that modern steel mills cannot replicate at the speed they operate. Handmade masa from a metate has cell walls that are partially ruptured at the exact right scale, large enough to release starch fully, and it's small enough to retain structural integrity during cooking. This masa holds moisture better during cooking, dries out more slowly after cooking, and maintains its texture in stored tortillas significantly longer before turning stiff and crumbly. Your grandmother was not grinding by hand out of tradition. She was grinding by hand because the tortillas made that way were still soft 12 hours later, and the ones from the mill were hard by noon. Listen to me. The 17th trick is charcoal, not as fuel, but as a water purifier and mineral source. A piece of clean hardwood charcoal dropped into your clay water vessel absorbs organic compounds and certain bacteria through adsorption. The charcoal's surface is microscopically porous and traps particles in those pores. Simultaneously, as the charcoal sits in the water, it slowly releases calcium, potassium, and magnesium ions into the water in trace amounts, slightly mineralizing the water and adjusting its pH toward a range where bacterial growth is slower. Your ancestors kept a piece of charcoal in every water vessel. Today, that same technique is sold in premium wellness markets in Japan as a luxury product at 400 pesos a stick. We had it free from last night's fire and called it common sense. The 18th trick is the Comal's residual heat. That thick clay disc, dense, heat-retentive, stays genuinely hot for 40 minutes after you remove it from the fire. That is 40 minutes of free cooking energy that most modern kitchens waste entirely. Your grandmother used it to toast seeds for the week's salsas, warm leftover food to a safe temperature without relighting the fire, and dry fresh herbs for storage in the cooling phase as the temperature dropped gradually from 70 degrees to 40. She paid for the fire once and extracted twice the work from it. Today, we turn the electric burner off the moment the food is done and waste everything the coil still has to give. The grandmother saw the tail end of every fire as an asset. we see it as nothing. The 19th trick is Hierba santa, those large, soft, fragrant leaves that taste of anise and pepper. Wrap tamales in Hierba santa leaves before steaming, and the essential oils in the leaf, primarily saffrole and other phenylpropanoids, migrate into the masa surface during cooking. These compounds have mild antimicrobial properties that extend the keeping quality of the finished tamal by a day or two beyond what a plain corn husk-wrapped tamal achieves. In a household making tamales in large batches, that extra day is the difference between a celebration dish and a waste event. The leaves come from a plant that grows in moist corners of the yard, reaches shoulder height in a season, and asks for nothing. The preservation benefit comes for free with the flavor. The 20th trick is Copal resin burned in the storage room before sealing a new grain harvest inside. Copal smoke contains diterpenic acids and terpene compounds that are genuinely antimicrobial and antifungal in enclosed spaces. Burning copal inside a sealed granary before closing it with the new harvest fumigates the space, killing mold spores and insect eggs in wall cracks and between stored sacks. The Spanish priests interpreted this ritual as ceremony and missed the engineering. Your ancestors were doing chemical fumigation with a resin they collected for free from the bursera tree in the surrounding hills. The entire year's food supply, protected by smoke from a tree that grew wild on the hillside, costing only the effort to collect and dry the resin. The 21st trick is the underground fermentation vessel. A clay crock buried up to its neck in the earth benefits from the same thermal stability as the root cellar. The earth's constant temperature slows fermentation to a controlled rate, produces more complex flavors, and dramatically reduces the risk of a batch going bad from temperature spikes. Fermented chili sauce, fermented beans, preserved vegetables in brine, all stored underground in sealed clay stay. Stable for months in conditions that a surface-stored jar could not survive through a hot summer. The earth is doing temperature regulation work for free, continuously, without being asked. Listen to me. The 22nd trick is the dried maguey leaf fiber itself, once the needles and the pulca have been harvested. The long, sisal-like fibers of the maguey leaf, when dried and bundled, create a natural insulating material that slows heat transfer significantly. Pack the walls of your food storage area with dried maguey fiber bundles, and you reduce the rate at which exterior summer heat penetrates into the storage space. Lower temperature rise means slower bacterial growth. Slower bacterial growth means food lasts longer. The maguey was the hardware store and the refrigerator insulation supplier and the sewing kit and the beverage source simultaneously, and it grew on the rocky hillside where nothing else was willing to bother. The 23rd trick is the fat cap. When you render animal fat, lard specifically, and pour it as a hot liquid over cooked meat packed tightly into a clay crock, the fat fills every air pocket as it cools and solidifies into a hermetic seal over the surface of the meat. No oxygen reaches the meat beneath the fat. No bacteria can enter from above. The technique called conserva de manteca in various forms across Mexico produced meat that was safe and edible at room temperature for weeks in cool conditions. When you needed the meat, you dug through the fat layer, extracted what you needed, and poured more hot fat to reseal. The fat cap was reusable. The meat lasted. The technique cost only the fat from the same animal. So the 24th trick is fermented corn masa itself. Masa that has been left to ferment for 24 to 48 hours before use. Fermented masa has a lower pH from the lactic acid produced by naturally occurring lactobacillus bacteria in the environment. Lower pH means the finished tortilla or tamale is already in an environment where mold growth is slower. Fermented masa tortillas genuinely last longer without molding than fresh masa tortillas made the same morning. Additionally, the fermentation pre-digests some of the phytic acid in the corn, making the minerals in the tortilla more bioavailable to your body. Your tortilla from fermented masa feeds you more per bite and lasts longer on your table. The technique requires only patience, letting the masa sit covered overnight before cooking. The 25th trick. And this is the one that makes the whole system run, is the philosophy of the zero waste cycle itself. Understanding that every output from one process is the input for the next. Nixtamal ash goes back to the next batch of corn. Tepeche rinds go to the garden. Corn cobs become cooking fuel. Corn husk becomes food wrapper. Copal ash becomes a surface sealant mixed with water and applied to cracks in the storage room walls. Maguey fiber insulates the bodega. The smoke from the fire cures the meat hanging above it. The residual heat of the Copal dries the herbs you harvested this morning. Every single process feeds the next one, and nothing exits the system as waste. Your grandmother did not have less. She ran a closed-loop system so efficient that modern engineers are only now, in 2026, beginning to describe the principles she executed by instinct before breakfast every morning of her life. The food in that clay pot is still perfect. The ash is ready for the next batch. The maguey is already growing back. And every trick she knew is still available to you. Today, this week, with what is already in your kitchen and your yard. If you are willing to stop throwing away what she knew was pure gold.